Yeah, this actually brings, so just the other day we had what we call the Circular Firing Squad in a network I run, which is this debate program where the goal is not necessarily to win, it's to figure out how to have good, vigorous debate among people on different principles. And we were talking about inflation. And one of the things that I find very striking there is if you can print money infinitum without inflation, then why don't we just print all the money and get New York out of debt and get Illinois out of debt? And the people that are saying we don't have to worry about inflation don't seem to have a good answer for that. What do you think? Why, if people are saying the bigger thing that we have to worry about is deflation, can't we just print our way out of this?
It's, I lived my world, my financial world, before I did this stuff that I'm doing now. I was at Citibank, and I was in Mexico trading emerging market currencies, and I ran treasury floors, and so we were always. And then I was in Poland for 9 years, and always in the markets. And if there's a truth you learn out there, is that you can get away with bad behavior for a long time, right? You can always get away with bad behavior. It happens. It doesn't matter what thing we're talking about. People can act bad. But eventually, eventually they pay a price. And so, I was in Mexico in 1994 when we had the tequila crisis. Most people won't remember that, but that's when Mexico was borrowing hard currency like crazy. People were lending it to them, and it was a big party because you got you got a huge interest if you lent money to Mexico. And as long as Mexico could pay you back, man, you were making tons of money. But everybody knew that one day Mexico would not be able to keep it going. There would be a massive deflation of the peso, and it happened. In 1994, it happened. And so I remember some lady who was a friend of mine had been investing in Mexico, and after the peso devalued and she lost a ton of money, she goes, but I was told that would never happen, right? Because she believed that the game would just go on forever, and it didn't. And eventually the IMF and Clinton came out and bailed out Mexico with $50 billion. My next job was in Poland in 1999. Right after I got there, Russia, had done the same thing. They borrowed so much money and then they couldn't pay it back. So eventually you pay the price. So you can try to print as much money as you want and try to get away with it, but when you print trillions and trillions and trillions, there's no free lunch, and that's a life lesson I've learned. In a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good adage to hold the idea that you don't get away with anything ever. You will always pay for your sins.
Yeah.
And it starts to try and keep you on the up and up. And during that inflation discussion, somebody brought up the point that the way that this plays out is one of the ways that it could play out is that people start all these projects because there's no end to the amount of money that people can promise that banks can put up. And then you start having so much money chase after goods like steel, where they're just not available. Like I heard the other day that steel prices in December went up 40%, and prior to that, in the ag barn building industry, the most they'd ever gone up in a single year was 8%. So you're talking about real prices going up, the value of the ability to be able to purchase these things. And what will happen is people will start these projects, get them a quarter of the way through, a half the way through, and then just not be able to get goods or not be able to afford the structural materials to finish building them. And then
you remind me of my days in Mexico, where you drive around and you see these unfinished buildings. For 25 years, there's this massive building right in the middle of Mexico City, and you can drive by and you can see right through it. They never finished it, and that's probably an example. And there were many examples of like that in Mexico, where you get market disruptions and things are left alone. But I think, Vance, an important point about all this too is, let me tell you about who always got screwed or who always suffered. In Mexico, when we had that big deval, the wealthy people always make out. They know how to figure it out. But the poor, the low income people, they get destroyed, right? They're not protected. And it'll be the same thing here, where we can print and have this inflation, but it's not real. It's fake, right? And if you build an economy based on printed money, it's not real, and eventually, it's a house of cards and it comes down. It's always the little guy that gets hurt.
Yeah, it's that, what is it called? The cantilever effect, where the people closest to the money that are being printed, they do just fine. They take their turn at the trough and put it into equities or things that can float along with it. But the people that get the dollars last are the people that are left holding the bag. They have a bunch of worthless paper, and the other people have already grabbed the value out of it. And then you have a deepening crisis, and eventually the gap between the poor and the rich must be reconciled. And I think that's something you can go and look at, so many ancient texts all the way down to the Bible that say, like, if you go too far where the poor get too disassociated from where the wealthy are, eventually bad things happen.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's a good point, an interesting point. But I do get into that discussion sometimes where, I don't think that the people getting wealthy, right? People getting wealthy through good ways and through innovation and through what do you want to call it? Just good growth in the economy. That's fine, and everybody participates in it. It's when we create a false economy where it no longer makes sense and people can't. This whole thing right now where we're printing money, giving people money not to work, right? Eventually they're incentivizing them not to work. All that stuff is setting us up for failure because people are losing their skills. There's plenty of things to talk about there. But yeah, what we don't want to do is create a false economy that then people are ticked off about because, payback is hell.
So one of the things, I have a few listeners that are owners of property. And they're renting their property out, in the form of apartments, and they have people that just don't have to pay, and there's no way to evict them, which seems to me to be the very foundation of private property, all the way down to John Locke. Is if I choose to rent to you, you have to pay to me, and anybody that interferes with that is interfering with the foundational right of civilization, which is property. What are your thoughts on this eviction moratorium and then the CDC stepping in and saying, we agree, and it should go on nationally for months and months more? Yeah,
so here's where we get to Illinois and the next kind of comparison of things. I was in Florida last week, and I was there for a week on vacation, and you rapidly see the difference in two economies. One that's an open economy and tries to keep things going and try to do things the market way. The other is Illinois that shuts down. Stays shut down, keeps doing more lockdowns, and then because of that has to do more rent control or rent, or things like you're mentioning, and so therefore you get into a false economy again. And I, the owner of a property, suddenly can't get paid, but I also can't, but the economy's not open so that people can have their jobs and make their payments, and then you have the government fill in the missing earnings with these extra payments. Unemployment insurance and extra payments, and it becomes a wacko economy. It's not a real economy. And I as I mentioned, I spent 9 years in Poland. I got there in 1998, just not too many years after the wall came down. And we some people don't. Okay, people think of communism and whatever happened is something long time ago. No, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, just a few years back, I was in Poland where they were unwinding 50 years of economic destruction, 50 years of individual property and individual rights were destroyed, and Poland was working. It was an amazing time to be there because they were working to give back the powers to the individual. They're working hard to get laws that gave private property rights back to the people again. And here we are in Illinois and in many parts of the country doing the exact opposite. I mean, it could not be weirder that that was 20 years ago. I was doing the opposite of what we're doing now here in Illinois. It's fascinating, and and it won't work.
That really strikes me. Something I'd never thought to look into is I kind of have the short man's view of history, because I always think I knew that Russia and Poland had a communist revolution and then they brought them in, but I always thought it just was there. But I never really thought about how did communism get stacked on? What were the ways that it came on? And I would have to imagine that it has something to be like what it is right now, where people are like, no, this is still, a democratic capitalistic situation. Don't worry about it. These are just things we're doing in the short term. And then eventually you wake up and you've been lulled into this sense where so many things have changed that take it away from the private property system that you may call it a capitalist system, but in effect, it's communism.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, they'll even use the words of democracy to put on those bigger restrictions, right? So to have a better democracy, we need this rent control or the all these different things that are happening today. We've had in Illinois, and I don't know how it's been where you are. We've had Governor Pritzker run the state with some 70-something executive orders and 13 or 14 months straight of one-man rule on how to run the economy. If you think about it, he's choosing how to run the economy, something that we've worked, hundreds of years on, or thousands of years, right, to figure out how do we determine how to get what kind of bread on a shelf, right, or how many loaves of bread on a shelf. The markets figure that out. And here you have Governor Pritzker deciding what to open, what not to open. And we've seen all the discrepancies, right? You're allowed to have this kind of store open, but not that kind of store. Things that don't make sense. And here we are, adding all kinds of decisions now and giving people more money based on this or that. And, it's bastardizing the economy and where we've been. And it's going to be hard to figure out how we unwind all this. Maybe it just becomes so mucked up that the unwind happens.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.